This is the introduction video for the ASP.NET MVC 5 Fundamentals course on LearnVisualStudio.net. I've always found it hard to know where to get started on a new topic. There's this old expression, how do you eat an elephant? And the punchline is, well, one bite at a time. But it's hard to know where to take that first bite out of the elephant without getting trampled, I guess, to overextend that analogy. It's kind of boring to just sit and watch 30-minute slideware presentation as a means of an introduction to a topic. So I want to start writing code as quickly as possible to discover the strengths and the weaknesses of ASP.NET MVC, all within the context of where they fit into the building of a real application. So I think you're going to find that by taking this approach, it'll be a first hour well spent. But before I can do that, I have to start off assuming you know absolutely nothing. So let's start at the very beginning. ASP.NET MVC is a web development framework that's built on top of core ASP.NET building blocks, but it takes a completely different approach from ASP.NET web forms to building web applications. And the different approach is really described by that acronym MVC, which stands for Model View Controller. And Model View Controller is an architectural design pattern for implementing user interfaces that's been around for a really, really long time. As you're going to come to learn as you get deeper into software development, a design pattern is a solution to a common problem. And there are low-level, tactical-level design patterns for solving little problems. And then there are also high-level, strategic, architectural-style patterns for solving really big, high-level problems. And so the focus of the Model View Controller pattern is to solve a common architectural problem, and that is how to ensure that the presentation layer of our application, so the concerns of a presentation layer, are not munged together, making application development and maintenance more difficult. So in other words, the MVC pattern helps you separate concerns within your presentation layer. So yeah, we're talking about, I guess you could call them sub-concerns related to the presentation concern. And as we start writing these little code experiments really quickly here, you're going to notice that there are differences between MVC and web forms in terms of the workflow, in terms of thought process, in terms of how a request is actually handled and a dynamic web page is created and then returned back to the requester. All of this is in an effort to separate concerns inside of the presentation layer of your application. So when we heard that term, separation of concerns, we should start thinking about maintenance-driven architecture, right? That's why we're looking at this on the maintenance side of the curriculum instead of the tools-driven side of the curriculum. And hopefully that'll become clear as we progress through. Now, there are a couple of little things that we need to talk about before we start writing code. The first is to talk about Visual Studio itself. As you can see, I'm currently running Visual Studio 2013 Express for web. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I already have it installed on this particular computer that I'm recording on. However, I would recommend that if you don't already have Community Edition installed, go ahead and install Community. It's essentially the same as the paid professional edition of Visual Studio. And the reason why, and I tried to install the Community Edition on this computer, however, I have Ultimate installed. So apparently you cannot install Community on a computer that already has Professional, Premium, or Ultimate installed, because it's essentially the same thing as professional. Okay, and this all gets a little confusing, but I just learned the difference between the Express editions and the Community editions just a week ago. So I'm kind of excited to actually understand what their thought process was in introducing the Community edition. It all is about licensing. So apparently the license for the Community edition is for people who are just using this for their own private use. Obviously the Professional, Premium, and Ultimate are licensed to be used in an enterprise or a company setting. The Express editions can also be used for commercial use. So I'm not a lawyer, but to ensure that you're using these tools legally, make sure that you carefully read the end user license agreement, especially if you're thinking about using Community Edition inside of your company. I don't think that's allowed. So it's important that you keep in mind that what we're going to discuss in this course, and virtually all the courses on LearnVisualStudio.net, will work regardless of whether you're using Express 2013 for web or the newer Community Edition, the 2013 Community Edition, or Professional Premium or Ultimate, whatever you have available. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is in regard to the actual version of MVC itself. And this is where another bit of confusion pops in. In this series, we're going to be covering ASP.NET MVC version 5. This is built on top of ASP.NET version 4.5. Okay, so MVC 5 built on top of ASP.NET 4.5. I know this can be very confusing. Here's how to keep it straight. Again, think that MVC is built on top of core ASP.NET functionality. Those core features that are common across all ASP.NET related technologies, including web forms, web pages that you can build with the Web Matrix tool. I don't even know if that's still available. MVC, a technology called Signal R, which is a real-time communication a protocol, so you can talk between client and server, kind of in a chat style, and then also the Web API framework for creating web services. So you have all of those technologies that are built on top of these core building blocks of ASP.NET 4.5, and each of those technologies have their own versions. For example, I know that Web API is in version number 2 as I record this video, whereas it's sitting on top of ASP.NET 4.5. And so MVC, again, sitting on top of ASP.NET 4.5, is in version 5. It's been going through a lot of quick revs to bring the functionality level up, and so they've created major version numbers to indicate that. Now, one last thing that I want to note here is that the next version of MVC, which will be MVC version 6, will have 2 significant paths that you can go down. There will be some significant changes down one path and some incremental changes down the other path. Let's start there. So that first path will be the next incremental update of what I'm going to demonstrate in this series. So it's going to be built on top of ASP.NET 4.6, just a small incremental version on top of ASP.NET 4.5, and it will have much of the functionality that you've come to expect and learn in this series. However, the second path is going to be a huge departure from what we're going to talk about here in this series. It's going to be built on top of a new version of .NET called the .NET Core. It's basically a stripped down, very fast, very small version of .NET. It can run not only on Windows servers, but then also on Mac and Linux, so you can actually develop ASP.NET MVC applications on a Mac or a Linux application, run them locally, and even host them out in a Mac or a Linux box eventually. And the goal here is to probably twofold. First of all, to include in Microsoft's new openness, to include all developers across all platforms, so they can get them into the Azure services pipeline. Okay, and so the goal again here with a smaller stripped down version of the .NET Core is to create what's called a cloud optimized version of ASP.NET MVC applications, so that they can run much more quickly and efficiently in the cloud than you might experience if you were just hosting your own web server. Okay. Now, at the time that I record this, those details are just emerging. However, you might wonder then, well, should I even bother learning ASP.NET MVC right now? It seems like things are in a state of flux. I assure you, things are always in a state of flux with ASP.NET MVC. The revs have been so quick through the years. And yeah, I think you should go ahead and learn it now, because while maybe some differences in syntax will emerge over time, over the next year or so after I record this video, the fact of the matter is that many of the concepts will stay the same, and so it's probably a good idea to go ahead and put a line in the sand and say, this is where I'm going to start learning, and then I can add to that knowledge incrementally as new concepts are revealed from Microsoft. Okay, so that's all I want to say in the way of introduction. In the very next lesson, then we're going to go ahead and create our first Hello World application. See you there.